Welcome to the training for the Feelings First format, a strategy for connecting over difference. My name is Jed Irvin. What do I mean by connecting over difference? Well, this phrase speaks to the following question. Is it possible to engage over difference and wind up with relationships strengthened rather than degraded? Well, this is difficult enough to do in person, but it's even more difficult to do over remote communications that use text, such as email and social networks. So why is this? Well, let's look at the first problem. The first problem with email and social media, context is missing when the message arrives at the receiver. The emotion feeling state of the sender is not fully present. There are clues in the words that are present, but those clues are very easy to misconstrue. Now what happens is the receiver has to assign an emotion feeling state to the sender as part of their sense-making process, and often this can wind up being off the mark. Now, if difference is being discussed, a natural anxiety arises in the receiver, and this can throw things off even worse. So it can be very likely that the emotion state we assign to the sender is going to be incorrect. Now, how do we address this? Well, one solution is to just add back in the missing context to make the emotion feeling state of the sender explicit in the message. Now, a second problem with discussing difference. Well, there's an implicit context for conversations that discuss difference, and that is that they are to correct or affirm the other's ideas. There's a natural tendency to try to come to consensus around ideas, because when consensus is attained, anxiety drops, and it's just more comfortable knowing that you're with people that think like you. But if you know or believe that the other person is on the other side of an issue, that tends to inspire resistance. It tends to close the heart, which tends to close the mind. So the solution is to change the context for the conversation. The new context is we are a community that is trying to stay connected while we share our differences. Now, this context is a completely different context. And how do we do this? How do we stay connected? We tell stories about our experience. What was the experience like to receive this email? What was the experience like to write a response? Now, there's a third problem that can come into play with these remote communications, something called simplification pressure. Strong emotions tend to apply pressure to simplify our sense-making process. Nuances are pushed out of view. The angrier I become, the more likely it is that the stories that come to mind are going to be shorter and shorter. If I'm just so angry about something, I might not even be able to come up with a word. I might just come up with, ah. But if I'm not quite as angry and I can come up with a word, it's going to be a word like jerk or idiot. The less angry I am, the more nuance winds up coming into that story. They're a jerk. They're ignorant. They are on the other side. These are the stories we typically walk away with when we're in conflict over textual communications. The solution to this problem: make the complexity explicit. Focus attention on our mix of emotions to prove that we are a complicated human being and not a cartoon. So it's these three solution strategies which guide the design of the Feelings First format. A few years ago, I got an email from the university I worked at that I've kind of summarized here that talked about the university planning a review to decide whether they should change the names of 4 of the buildings at the university, given that the 4 people the buildings were named after were either racists or they were involved with racist agendas to some degree. Now, I'm going to use this email to illustrate how the Feelings First format works. Now, you may think with the 3 principles involved in motivating the design that it's complicated, but the spirit of it is extremely simple. So the first thing to consider is, what are the feelings that I had when I got this email? Well, truth be told, I had a mix of feelings. One feeling I had was gratitude and relief that society at large was finally listening to people of color to understand more about the pain they've been going through for so long. Another feeling I had was a feeling of frustration, because my sense is that our society does not abide any complexity. It does not abide the full humanity of people. The notion that somebody could do a really bad thing and a really good thing, and we can hold both of those at the same time, it feels to me like society is incapable of doing that. So somebody is either a hero, and then when we find out the bad thing about them, they have to be thrown down as a monster. And this just feels wrong to me. I want to live in a world where somebody who does something horrible can then create something beautiful that is celebrated. So these are kind of 2 conflicting emotions. I did not want the university to change the names because this felt wrong to me from one direction, but I did want them to change the names because it felt right to me from another direction. So this is a case where I can express all of that. So on the right here, I'm going to write my response using the Feelings First format. Now, the first thing I write is one sentence that just lists the feelings that arose in me. That's it. That's step 1. The first thing that this receiver is going to read is a simple sentence that lists my feelings. This accomplishes me specifying what my feelings are. I am nailing down what the emotional reality of myself is when I'm composing this. There's going to be no ambiguity on the receiving end. Also, I have 2 conflicting emotions here. So this is going to conquer the urge of the receiver to simplify me into a non-human simplified form. And so what comes next? Well, the second statement is taking the narrative a little bit further. And notice what I'm doing here is I'm storytelling. I'm telling a story about what it was like to get that email and to think about responding. The second sentence that I'm putting here is always the same form. It's the words, "the story that arose was, ... Now, these are the 2 preambles that are going to convince the receiver's mind that I am telling a story here about what happened to me. Now, what comes next? Well, I'm going to paste in the next section because I've already written it for speed's sake. Now, this first one is a story around the gratitude. The gratitude arose around my relief that society at large is finally recognizing the pain and suffering that people of color have endured for so long. So that's a story just around the gratitude. Now, what was the story around the frustration? Well, the frustration arose around my sense that our culture cannot abide the true complexity of being human. People either need to be saints or monsters. I want to live in a world where both the good and the bad in a person can be held at the same time. I feel we should celebrate the good work that anyone does, despite whatever else they do. One of the buildings is named after one of the university founders. Without them, would we even have the university? So now I have a story around each of the emotions that came up. But one of the things that was really effective in our pilot exercise was when people shared personal stories. I'll let you pause the video if you want to read through my personal story, but the point is that having some revelation about my past that led me to have the feelings that I have about the issue, this was one of the most bonding components when we piloted this technique. And then I'll just end that with an in-community Jed. All right, let's do one last review of the feelings first format. The first sentence starts with the words, the feelings that arose were, or the feelings that arise are. And then you list the feelings. The second line is a line simply that has the words, the story that arose was, ... The presence of these two lines helps reinforce the notion that what is going on here is a storytelling exercise. The person writing this message is telling a story about their experience of receiving the original message and composing the response. Now, the third line on, this is where we actually tell the story that came up around those feelings. By mentioning the feeling right up front in each of these stories, it helps ground the receiver in the humanity of the sender. And by adding some personal story about my past that helped to bring me to have this frustration, this really pulls people in and lets them get to know you better. Well, that concludes the training for the Feelings First format for connecting over difference. Thanks for listening.